And where is God? He's in the pasture and He's in the valley. He is there at the top when everything is going well. He's there, but then He says when it turns to the valley and the darkness and death, He says, I'm there too. I'm right beside you. I didn't leave you.
Are you looking for meaning or a word from God that's relevant to your life? Are you searching for a better understanding of who God is? Well, you're in the right place. You found the Gary Talks About God podcast. This is a weekly podcast that comes to you from the pulpit of Red Bank Missionary Baptist Church in Germantown, North Carolina. The podcast is hosted by Red Bank Senior Pastor Gary Sanders. Now let's get ready to take that walk through God's Word with our pastor, teacher, and friend. Hey, he's that guy we call Gary.
We're back in our study of Genesis. In Genesis 39. And as you turn there, I got a question for you. What is, or I guess not what, but where, is the highest place you've ever been? And the opposite of that is, where's the lowest place you've ever been? Now, when I wrote that, I was like, okay, what would my answer be? And so I spent some time trying to figure it out. I finally figured out the highest place. Highest place was a few years ago. During Will's graduation, we drove up the Blue Ridge Parkway to a place called Craggy Gardens. I don't know if anybody has ever been there. It's really interesting. You ought to go. It's weird. You're in the middle of the mountains, but it's very, very barren. It's odd. Well, the elevation there at the visitor center was 5,640 feet. So that's the highest I've ever been, just a little over a mile. Now, the lowest, I had to get really creative, okay? And I had to go back a long way back in time to when I used to actually swim in the ocean. And the best I can figure is I've been 8 feet below sea level somewhere off the coast of Myrtle Beach. Like I said, I had to get creative. I've not been to Death Valley. I've not been to the Dead Sea. I've not been anywhere else. That's the lowest I've ever been, and I'm pretty good with that, quite frankly. For the record, Mount Everest is the tallest at 29,000 feet, and the Dead Sea is the lowest at 1,400 feet below sea level. Now, that's an interesting question to ask as we get to Genesis 39. For there are no mountains, nor are there any valleys in Genesis 39. However, we use those words to describe how we feel or how close we think God is in our lives, the presence of God in our lives, right? So if I were to turn that from a physical question to a spiritual question and ask you, where was the highest you've ever been in your spiritual life where you knew that God was right there with you? I mean, you were so high, you were almost in heaven. I mean, you knew He was there. There was no doubt He was with you, right? You might could come up with something. If I looked at you and I said, what was your valley? Because what we will do is probably say, in that valley, I was alone. God's presence was not there. He was not with me. And so while physical height and physical lowness on earth, we can look and say, this is where we are, and it becomes a true statement. But we cannot then correlate that to our spiritual relationship with God. We cannot measure our distance from God or our proximity to God through external circumstances. We cannot say if things are going well that God is with me. Nor can we say if things are going poorly, God is not with me. And so when we come to Genesis 39 this morning, we're going to look at it in just a few minutes. What if I told you this morning that measurement that we somehow are ingrained to equate is wrong? Moreover, what if instead of me just telling you it's wrong, what if God's Word this morning showed you that that's wrong? How would that change your life and impact your life? Not just today, but maybe in some things that have happened in the past. How would that impact your future? Last Sunday, we talked about looking at 2020 and the attitudes that we need going into 2020. How would that biblical truth change your attitude this morning as you know that as we walk this year, there will be mountains and there will be valleys? I imagine that it would replace some uncertainty and replace it with some concrete biblical truth. So let's read Genesis 39 this morning, verses 1 through 23, and dive into the text. Now Joseph, and I'm going to pause right there. I don't usually pause, but I do. Because last time we were in Genesis, we were not dealing with Joseph. We had that interlude in Genesis 38 with Judah and Tamar. So as we come to chapter 39, Moses is drawing our attention back to Joseph, who, just as a reminder, was thrown into a pit by his jealous brothers and then sold to Midianite traders who were heading down to Egypt. And so our attention is brought back to, okay, what became of Joseph? Now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, had bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his Egyptian master. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him, and he made him overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that he had. From the time that he made him overseer in his house and all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in the house and of field. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge, and because of him, he had no concern about anything but the food he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. And after a time, his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Behold, because of me, my master has no concern about anything in the house, and he has put everything that he has in my charge. He is not greater in this house than am I, nor has he kept anything from me except you, because you are his wife. And how can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" And as she spoke to Joseph day after day, he would not listen to her to lie beside her or to be with her. One day, when he went into somebody, saying, "Lie with me." And as soon as she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and he had fled out of the house, she called to the men of the household and said to them, "See, he has brought among us a Hebrew to laugh at us. He came in to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And as soon as he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and fled and got out of the house." Then she laid up his garment by her until his master came home. And she told him the same story, saying, "The Hebrew servant whom you have brought among us came in to me to laugh at me. But as soon as I lifted up my voice and cried, he left his garments beside me and fled out of the house." As soon as his master heard the words that his wife spoke to him, "This is the way your servant treated me," his anger was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him in the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed. This morning, as we read this story, and I'm sure that many of you have heard as well, the tendency is to latch on to the sexual aspect and the sexual morality of the story. And while that is in there, and the interaction between Joseph and his master's wife does indeed drive the story, this is not a treatise on how to maintain sexual purity. All right, this is not where we go to develop that. There are other texts. The reason I bring that up is because this story, as we're going to see, needs to be understood in the light of redemptive history and God's covenant fidelity towards his people. Because if we understand it in those terms and understand it in His covenant fidelity, then we understand the highs and the lows. We understand then the truth that whether it is high or whether it is low, God is with His people. And that is what we see. Just 2 points this morning from the text. They go hand in hand. And the first one is this: God is with His people in times of prosperity. God is with His people in the times of prosperity. Here we are telling us that Joseph has been brought down to Egypt, which is an interesting way of saying that Joseph didn't go there on his own, right? He is in Egypt not on his own doing. He got there because his brothers were mad at him, wanted to kill him, throw him in a pit, but then decided, hey, we won't kill him, we'll just sell him and profit off of him. So he has been brought down and he is sold to Potiphar. And we're told several things about Potiphar. He's an officer of Pharaoh, so he has an audience with Pharaoh. He's the captain of the guard, so he would be in charge of Pharaoh's security and maybe the police aspect of the Egyptian state, and that he is an Egyptian, which is an interesting thing to know because we know that. It seems to be self-evident. However, Egyptians were proud of being an Egyptian. So, of course, if you were the Pharaoh, you would want somebody who was proud to be an Egyptian to be in charge of the guard and protect you and be in your court. And so this is who Joseph is sold to. And we kind of think, well, maybe then things are going to get better for Joseph because he's sold to somebody who, if he has that standing in the court, then it makes sense that he would have some type of money, or he would be well regarded in the land. He would have a big palace, a big house to live in. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that the Egyptian would treat Joseph well. Well, we find out that when Joseph gets there, he tells us that the Lord, in verse 2, is with Joseph. And then it says, and he became a successful man. He's in Potiphar's house. We're told that the Lord is with him and he becomes successful. And we read through the text and we see that things are going terrific. And at this point, we're ready to go, good. Joseph deserves something good, right? Because up to this point, he's been on the outside. He's been alone, right? He's been very lonely. His brothers saw him, threw him in the pit. He was in the pit by himself. But even before that, when he shared the dreams, they didn't come around him and give him a great big hug, right? Oh, we're going to bow down to you? Great. We'll be one big happy family. You'll rule over us. No, they were like, I don't see that happening. Even when he told his dad says, what, me bow down to you? Joseph has spent a whole lot of his life alone, and here he is alone in Potiphar's house, and we're told that he becomes a successful man, and we are happy. Even though he's not in the land, we're happy that things are going to go well for him. And what we do is we say, all right, he is successful, therefore the Lord is with him. And when we make that statement, we get it backwards. Because the text makes it very clear that he is successful because the Lord is with him. It's not the other way. He's not successful, so now the Lord kind of comes up. Oh, Joseph is doing pretty well. The Lord's just going to kind of slide up in here beside him. As if the Lord wants to latch on to Joseph's success. But he's very successful. Look at what happens. He's in there and it says, that he is doing everything, and everything that he touches is increasing. And the Potiphar sees this. Now, this is amazing. In this time of prosperity for Joseph, when we look at this and we see what's going on, what we find out is that the Potiphar was able to see this. Right? Potiphar was able to understand this. It says he was with him, and then verse 3, his master saw this. Potiphar saw that the Lord was with Joseph. He recognized that. However he recognized it, whether it was just the blessings that the Lord was pouring out on Joseph, or whether it was something else, maybe Joseph was talking to him about his God and everything. Whatever it was, Potiphar recognized that Joseph's God was with him. Now, that's an amazing statement. Because what you have is someone who is outside the covenant, recognizing that God was with them. Even more amazing is when you recognize that this is an Egyptian who lives in a society that has a God to everything, who serves Pharaoh, who isn't just a ruler, but who the Egyptians see as a God who has come down, and sees the ruler Pharaoh as a God himself. For the Egyptian to look at Joseph and see that God is blessing Joseph, not Pharaoh, not all the myriad of gods that they have, but that the God is blessing Joseph, and to make that statement is amazing. And so everything was succeeding at Joseph's hands. And Potiphar sees this. But not only that, think about it this way as well. As he becomes successful, it says that the Lord was blessing Joseph. And then it says this as well. When he put him in there, look at verse 5. It says, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. Now this is interesting as well. Why in the world is God blessing Potiphar? That to us is like it doesn't compute. Here's a pagan idolater who has no fear of the Lord, and God is blessing him? What is going on? Well, did you catch how God is referred to in this chapter? Right? Keep saying the Lord with all capital letters. And when you see that, what do you know? What name is being used there? The name Yahweh. The covenant name of God. God's name. God's name is not God. God's name is Yahweh. Yahweh is with Joseph, telling us that the covenant-keeping God who has came to Abraham and the covenant with Abraham is keeping his covenant with Joseph. We're seeing that God is being faithful to his covenant. And part of that faithfulness to the covenant was when God told Abraham, says, look, if people will bless you, I will bless those who bless you. So it doesn't take really a lot of, we don't need to be a rocket science to put this together. God said, if anybody blesses you, I will bless them. Joseph is in Potiphar's house. Joseph is being blessed by the covenant-keeping God. Potiphar recognizes this, so part of what God has said in covenant, he starts to bless Potiphar as well. Now, Potiphar is a pretty smart man because he figures this out. And as he figures this out, he gives Joseph a wide berth to do everything in his house. Wouldn't you? I mean, think about it. If you knew somebody was in your house and God was blessing them, and part of God's promises and blessing them ended up blessing you, and everything in your house started to prosper, wouldn't you do everything you can to keep that person happy? Wouldn't you protect them? Wouldn't you put them in charge of absolutely everything? Here, take care of my cars. Here, take care of my accounts. Here, take care of my gardens. Hey, what you take care of everything. And in fact, Potiphar puts everything in Joseph's charge except his food, which has given people a little pause through the years. Why is food? And the best thing to think of is he didn't know how to cook Egyptian food. I mean that seems to be the bottom line. I mean, that really does, right? Y'all remember years ago, Pace Salsa? You remember their tagline? This stuff is made in where? New York City. The implication being if you're from New York City, you can't make salsa. And so the best thing that I can come up with is this Hebrew didn't know how to cook Egyptian food. All right? And so Potiphar just wanted a good cook in the kitchen. Joseph was really good in a whole lot of things. He just wanted a good cook. And so he said, I'm going to eat, I'm not going to put you in charge of my food. So we look at this story and we see what's happening. And here's where our minds go as we read the story about Joseph. God is with Joseph because Joseph is prospering. That's why. He's doing well in Potiphar's house. Things are going good with him. God is with him because he is prospering. And that's the equation that we make. And we take that equation then and we apply it to our lives and the lives of people around us. And we look at their lives and we see that things are going well for them. And we go, God must be with them. They don't have any medical issues. They're not having any trouble at work. They don't have any family problems. Everything they seem to do just turns out well. So God must really be with them. And we equate their success with the presence of God in their life. Because for us, that makes sense. That's what we want it to be. That's really what we want it to be. We want God to be in our lives. Yes, I hope first and foremost because He saves us. However, I think there's a part in our lives where we say we want God to be in our lives because if God is with us, He's going to bless me and He's going to prosper me. And that everything is going to go well. And my life is going to be lived up here on the mountaintops. Well, it's just not right. As much as we want it to be right, it's not. And the order of how this is recorded for us in Scripture tells us that, first of all, the Lord was with Joseph. It could have stopped right there and not said anything else about his success. But the Lord was with him. The two things do not equate. Yes, it is true that the Lord was with Joseph in his time of prosperity. But it does not mean that the only reason the Lord was with Joseph was because of his prosperity. All right, that's one of the reasons why Baptists take such a hard stance against the prosperity gospel. It's just not true. Will God bless His people? Absolutely. Will God make His people prosper? Absolutely. Is God with them in times of prosperity? Absolutely. But is that the defining mark of being a Christian and God's presence in your life? No. Because when we finish the story of Joseph, we take a turn in the end part of verse 6 where we're told something that's just really kind of odd. We're not told about Joseph's management skills. We're not told about how well Joseph came in and redid the books and cut waste and decreased expenses and increased output so that Potiphar prospered. We're told that Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. That's an odd thing to put in the story, unless that might cause him some trouble. And it does. And from the trouble, we learn this, that God is with His people in adversity as well. God is with His people in adversity. The end of 6, Joseph is handsome in form and appearance. He is the only male in the Bible described this way. No other male in the Bible is described as handsome in form and appearance, including Adam. Do you know the only female who is described those ways? His mom. She's the only female who's described that way, not Eve. Those are the only two in the Bible described as handsome in form and appearance. And what happens is, Potiphar's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and says, "Lie with me." So here we have it. Here we have the setup for things are going well for Joseph, but now there's tension that has been brought into the story. What is going to happen? And so here is Joseph, handsome form and appearance, he was sold into slavery at 17. So for him to probably excel and to do well, he's probably late teens, early 20s, right? So Joseph is a fine specimen of a man who, guys, at 17 through 20, our hormones and our thoughts were probably, well, they were. And his Potiphar's wife comes and says, "Lie with me." And so here comes all this temptation at this man in fine form and appearance. And we're going, all right, what's going to happen? What's he going to do? Because here's Potiphar's wife, who is a society woman, who has servants, who is used to getting what she wants. Do you think that if your husband was the captain of the guard and was in Pharaoh's presence, do you think that there were a lot of people in Egypt who would turn down your request? Probably not, because you probably could end up in prison pretty quickly because your husband had the keys. So whatever she wanted, she was used to getting. So she comes to Joseph and says, lie with me. Just those three little words. It's not, hey, Joseph, I really think you're handsome and attractive, and I've kind of fallen for you. I love your work ethic. Here, it's just a command. It's as stark as it can be. It's just here. You have to do this. I'm used to getting my way. You're my servant. Do what I tell you to do, and this is what I want you to do. Then we have Joseph's response. For as brusque as her command is, Joseph's response, he takes some time and he kind of rebuffs her on three different levels. He says, look, my master has no concern about anything. Look, everything in the house, he has given me control over, and everything is going well. My master trusts me. And I don't want to betray his trust. Secondly, he says, you know what? He's given me everything, but he's not told me that I can have you. He's given me everything but you. Now, that doesn't conflict with the food, because some things you just don't need to say. Potiphar just didn't need to tell Joseph, stay away from my wife. It goes without saying. But then look at what Joseph does. So he says, I'm not going to betray my master's trust. You're not mine to have. But then he says, I will not do this great wickedness and sin against God. And in that moment, he describes what she is asking as great wickedness and sin against God. He decides, you know what? I don't care if this might be some strategic adultery, right? Maybe she'll give me more favor and I'll be able to use it to rise even, farther in my career. He says, no, I can't do that. I can't, because it is a sin against God. It's great wickedness. And that's how God views it. You remember in Psalm 51 when David comes to confess his adultery with Bathsheba? Do you remember how it starts? He comes and he confesses his adultery and he says, against you and you only have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight. So Joseph says, I can't do this great evil. It's wrong. He is telling us, on a side note here, that the decree of morality is divine and therefore absolute. Because everything that is being thrown at him right now in this temptation, he should be able to say, you know what? My dad kind of got a little mad at me last time we talked. My brothers threw me in a pit as they ate over here and heard my screams and debated whether to kill me or sell me. Here I am down in Egypt. Nobody is going to know what I do. My dad won't know, my brothers won't know, and really Judah, and he was such a fine moral example of what to do in sexual purity. So nobody will know. It'll be okay if I give in, right? Where he takes the morals and he makes them relative to a situation to justify sinning against God. But what he says, I will not do this great wickedness and sin against God, tells us that morality is divine and absolute and does not change based on the circumstances and the situation. So he says, no, I'm not going to do that. Well, she didn't take no for an answer. She kept pressing and pressing and pressing and pressing, and he did everything he could to not even go near her. He wouldn't even listen to her. Until one day, She grabs his coat and says, lie with me. And at this point, she's got him in his grasp and he has no choice but to flee. And so he flees and he runs out and she's left there holding the garment. And at this point, I can only think she's enraged. She's not gotten what she wanted. And so she calls her servants in and says, look at what has happened. Because she's got to come up with something. She has to come up with some story or else she is guilty. So look at what happened. This servant has come in here to make sport of us and to make fun of me and to attempt to rape me and do all this. Look at what has happened. Kind of a rehearsal for what's going to come later when she tells her husband. The husband shows up and says the same thing. Look, he's coming here to make sport at us. He's come to laugh at me. And I cried and he left and here he is. And we get to the end of verse 18 and we're going, no, that's not what happened. And we get to the end of verse 13 and we go, man, it was going so well for Joseph. Just like earlier, it was going so well and he got thrown in a pit. It was going so well for him. And now here's Potiphar's wife lying to her husband about him. No, it can't happen to Joseph again. And it says in verse 19, as soon as his master heard the words, this is the way your servant treated me, his anger was kindled. Now, it's very interesting at the end of verse 19 that we're not told who his anger was kindled at. It just said his anger was kindled. And so there is some reasoning to think, all right, his anger is kindled, and then when we read he was just put in prison instead of summarily executed, that he wasn't quite sure of his wife's story for whatever reason. And so Joseph ends up being thrown in prison. And here's what we do when we read stories like this. God must have left him. He must have done something where he wasn't in the Lord's presence anymore. What did he do that we didn't know? Did he think that he might wanted to sleep with her, and so God said, nope, I'm on to you? Did the accounts get a little too heavily favored in front of Potiphar, so he slid some money over into his account? What happened? What did he do so that he ends up in prison and ends up in the valley? He had to have done something. But not only that, since he obviously had to do something and he's now in prison, then God must have left him whenever he did that. Isn't that how we think? Isn't that how we look at people's lives and go, God must have left you? You're in this valley. What'd you do? Right? Job, the victim of a cosmic wager. What did his friends say? What did his friends in great eloquence say for 38 chapters? Job, repent of what you did. Job, confess your sin. The Lord is not with you, Job. Just confess what you have done so that the Lord will bless you again. It takes them 38 chapters to say that, right? I mean, they're really loquacious in their wording. But, you know, that's the summary of their statements. And we come to Joseph and we go, what happened? But here's where we make our mistake. Look at verse 21. But what? The Lord was with Joseph. Joseph is now in a prison. When we actually read Psalm, I can't remember, I think maybe Psalm 95, it tells us that his neck was in a chain and his feet was fettered. So he was thrown in prison and shackled. Okay, so he wasn't just running around the prison immediately when he first got there. And so we look at this valley and we say to him, oh my goodness, God has left him because he's in the valley. And then we say every time that we're in a valley, God has obviously left us. And we get right here and we look and we see that is not correct. It is wrong. Look who is with him. Who is with him? Is God with him? Or is the Lord with him? It is Yahweh. It is the covenant God who said that, Abraham, I'm calling you and you're going to be my people and I'm going to be your God. It's with him in the prison. Not only the Lord, Yahweh was with him, but look, it said, and it showed him what? Steadfast love, that hesed love that we've talked about on so many times. That is not just, oh, I love you. That covenant, faithful, loyal love. He's not just beside Joseph. He is with Joseph in the most intimate, covenant, faithful way that he can be, so that he is with Joseph in the valley. And we know from Psalm 136 that steadfast love of the Lord, what? It endures forever. So here he is in the valley, in prison, and in his adversity. And where is God? God is right there with him, pouring steadfast love onto Joseph. And so this corrects our misguided thinking that because we're in a valley, God is obviously not with us. That is not true. Psalm 23 that we know and we love so well. Have you ever read that psalm going, where is God? Right? Because it starts off and it's this picture of lush pastures and still waters. And then it turns into valleys and darkness and death. And where is God? He's in the pasture and He's in the valley. He is there at the top when everything is going well. He is there when it's beautiful and relaxing and you're just basking in the presence. He's there, but then He says when it turns to the valley and the darkness and death, He says, I'm there too. I'm right beside you. I didn't leave you. From going from mountain to valley does not mean that somewhere along the way that God left you by yourself. And we see this beautifully illustrated in the incarnation, right? Matthew chapter 1, in recording the birth of Jesus, Matthew quotes Isaiah 7:14, where he says, Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall call his name what? Emmanuel, which means God with us. At the very incarnation of Christ, we are told that it is God coming to be with us. He is coming to be with His people. Now, they have been told that forever, and they know that, but here it is in physical form. God is with His people. So Matthew begins with God with us. How does Matthew end? Matthew ends, Matthew chapter 28, verse 20, the Great Commission. Go therefore into all the nations, baptizing, making disciples, right? And he says what at the end of the Great Commission? He says what? Lo, what? I am with you. How long? Forever. I am with you forever to the end of the age. Isn't that an amazing, comforting thought? To know that when you are in the valley, or whatever valley is coming our way in 2020, that God will be with you. That you don't have to equate whether or not God is with you because you're prosperous or because you're broke, or He's not with you because you're broke. You don't have to look at your times in trouble and go, God must not be with me, because He has. And that's an amazing, comforting thought. But there's one more thought that I want to tie in this morning before we finish, and it won't take but a second. And it's found in Mark 15, verse 34. This is at the end of Jesus' life. This is at the end where He has been put on the cross, and He is dying on the cross. In mere moments, He will breathe His last. And it says, at the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means what? My God, why have you forsaken me? This is really important. At the height of His suffering, at the height of the suffering of Jesus, of Emmanuel, of God with us, at the moment on the cross where Jesus is bearing the weight of being made sin for us, At that moment, he's not only enduring the physical suffering, but he endures the removal of the Father's presence. In that moment, Jesus was forsaken by God so that you who believe in Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior will never have to experience that yourself. I don't know about you, but I think that would change the way I look at my life. That he experienced being forsaken by God, so that when we are in the mountain, when we're on the mountains or in the valleys, we will never experience what he did on the cross for us.
You've been listening to the Gary Talks About God podcast. Are you looking for a church? Well, Red Bank Missionary Baptist Church is a community of believers who exist to glorify God and see transformed lives through the gospel of Jesus Christ. You can find us on the web at www.redbankmbc.com. Also, come visit us on Sunday at 8104 Red Bank Road in Germantown, North Carolina. Did you like this podcast? We put one out each and every week, so don't forget to subscribe. We hope this has been a blessing to you, and we thank you for listening.